This is the big challenge that everybody has. Stop letting sellers run your business. So I want to talk to you a little bit about pricing leadership versus pricing fear. All right. When we talk about pricing, this is the one thing that's the most misunderstood. It's the one thing about the 10-day strategy that gives people the most anxiety. And it's the one thing that we really need to excel at in order to really elevate our game. All right. So here's the bottom line. If you let sellers dictate price, you're in a position where you're operating from fear. Now, listen, what I'm going to say might sting a little bit, but when you let sellers dictate price, that is not a strategy. That is fear. Let that sink in for a second. All right. What I mean by fear is, it's fear of losing the listing. It's fear of conflict. It's fear of saying no. So quick show of hands here. Have you ever taken an overpriced listing because you didn't want to lose it? Have you ever argued with a seller about price? Have you ever caved on price? All right. This is probably true of all of us, that when arguing and caving are the same behavior. All right. They're both reactions. Neither are leadership. Okay. So at the end of the day, we're just dealing with a fear of losing control. So let's call it what it is. Arguing with a seller is emotional. Caving to a seller's request, that's emotional. Both are driven by fear of losing the listing. So overpricing the listing is not a strategy. It's proof that you're not controlling the process. Taking overpriced listings, agreeing with sellers to list the price and overpriced listing, unless you have some ulterior motive, is allowing the seller to control everything. If they control the price, they control the transaction. And if they control the transaction, they control your income. All right. So most agents have an identity problem. You got to really get aligned with this. You are not a door opener. You are not a marketing assistant. You are not there to upload photos and hope. Okay. You're not their servant. Okay. You're a pricing strategist. You don't control the market. You control how your clients react to the market. And that's a big, profound shift. So I'm going to say it again. You don't control the market. We as agents do not control the market, but we can have some control. We do have influence on how our clients, how our sellers read the market, how they perceive market conditions. We also have some control how the market responds to our listing. All right. So our job is interpretation. Okay. Our job is to translate market data and frame it in a way so that the seller understands. At the end of the day, our job is to educate the seller and make sure that they've got the information they need to make the best decision for their family. All right. So pros measure, amateurs guess. So we all want to be pros here. So here's what you know. We know that the market does not lie. Once you've been on the market 10 days, you always know the truth. The market speaks in behaviors. The market will tell us exactly how our house is positioned. We can measure success. We can measure pricing strategy as whether or not it's working or not working by measuring the number of showings. What's the online traffic we're getting? Are we getting offers? Are we getting nothing? We can measure showings, traffic, offers, and silence. But if you're guessing after this 10 to 14 day window, that's not the market failing. That's you and the seller ignoring the data. So you know exactly how the listing is going after 10 days. So if you're getting no traffic after 10 days, you're probably priced about 8% too high. If you're getting some traffic, you're getting showings, but you're not getting offers, you're probably 3 to 5% too high. If you're getting lots of showings, but you're not getting offers, you're close, but you're still 1 to 2% too high. And when you think this way, if you think in terms of logic, if you think in terms of KPIs, key performance indicators, your thinking this way removes the emotion. And so when you anchor your recommended adjustments to behavior, it's no longer personal. Now it becomes strategy. Does that make sense to everybody? So what we want to do is we want to explain as part of our listing presentation. So I'm thinking about Gwen right now I think she did a really great job framing this in advance. that let's do it at this price. And if we don't get the results that we're looking for, then we need to have another conversation about price as a strategy. Now, I never say we need to lower your price. I say we need to adjust your strategy. Okay? Because strategy is logical, price is personal. So we never ask sellers to reduce their price. We always ask them to adjust their strategy, which means adjust the price. Okay? Language makes a big difference on how people proceed. Some sellers say, if we can get $500,000 for a house, we'll sell. And when they're saying that, that's not commitment. That's hope marketing. Okay. So they're emotionally attracted to a number. So many sellers are emotionally attracted to the number. They're not even sure why they're attracted to the number. And so when we go in there and we agree with them, we build a strategy around a fantasy. And what they listed it for doesn't have anything to do with what we're going to list it for. It has nothing to do with where the comps are. All right. And if we accept their frame, my house is worth $500,000, we've already lost leadership. We need to prove it to ourselves. Our job is not to look at the data and interpret it in a way that agrees with the seller. Our job is to interpret data and explain to the seller what it means and what we need to do in order to leverage that data in order to get the desired result. All right. So here's the thing about what we're doing. And this is the thing I wish I could get all agents to really nail. And hopefully you guys can nail this too, is that we're not trying to figure out what the house is going to sell for. Think about this, guys. Our job as a listing agent is not to figure out what the house is going to sell for. Our job is to figure out how to sell it for the highest possible price. Does that make sense? So if the market, proves that only $475,000 is achievable on a seller who's got a $500,000 expectation, the market will have clearly communicated the market value, and it will be the seller's choice to decide whether or not they want to accept it or not. So think about this. Seller says, I want $500,000. I'm not selling unless I get $500,000. My response is, all right, so what are you saying? You're saying if somebody offered you $490,000, you're not even going to consider it? Well, I would consider it. Okay, so now we can interpret what they said. They say, I'm only taking $500,000. I ask a question. So if somebody offers you $490,000, you wouldn't even consider it? Well, if they offered $490,000, sure, I would consider it. Okay. Now we know that that's not really firm. Does that make sense? One of the questions I asked sellers, I said, listen, what's your objective? Are you saying that you're only willing to sell the house for $500,000, and if you don't get every dollar of $500,000, you're not selling? Or you're selling that you want to price it at $500,000 and because you think that that's going to get you the best number and you're just trying to figure out how to sell it for the most amount of money? Well, how they answer tells you about two very different sellers, right? The seller who says, I'm only taking $500,000, not a penny less, they're telling you that they're firm. Now, I'm going to test that. Now, if they say, no, I think that we should list it at $500,000, and then, if we only get $475 or $490 or whatever it is, then that's okay. We'll probably end up taking that. Two different ways to go about doing that. So look, the first thing that I want to say is we don't price based on hope. We don't price based on, what the seller needs. We don't price based on the cost of renovations. We price based on market reaction. We price based on market data. And when we communicate this to the seller, okay, we accomplish three things. One, it validates them. I'm not saying that you can't get $500,000 for your house, Mr. Seller. All right. In fact, I think that if we use the right strategy, $500,000 is very achievable. Okay. So I frame it for them. So everything that I'm saying after that is designed to say, hey, the objective is $500,000. The conversation we're getting ready to have now is what's the strategy we're going to use to do that? So we can validate them. Number two, it removes the argument. So when I propose a lower list price, I'm not changing the objective. I'm just proposing a different strategy. Their proposed strategy is $500,000. My proposed strategy is $450,000, $475,000. But our shared objective remains the same. Does this make sense? The shared objective is still $500,000. And when we have the conversation and we properly educate them, we shift the authority back to the market. We're not trying to figure out how much the house is going to sell for. We're simply trying to figure out how to sell it for the most amount of money. And then the seller's job is going to be to figure out whether or not they want to accept that money or not. So the way that I explain it to them, I said, when we run this strategy, the best way to figure out what your house is worth, the best way to take all the money off the table, the best way to make sure that you sold it for the highest possible price the market will bear is by creating an atmosphere using a strategy that's going to induce multiple offers, multiple buyers competing to pay you the most amount of money for your house. And if we have a house that we want to sell for 500,000, but we only get 3 offers, one for 480, one for 485, one for 495, that's the value of the house. It doesn't matter how much you like it. It doesn't matter how great it is. It doesn't matter the cost of the renovation. It doesn't matter how much you owe. It doesn't matter how much you need. The market value is 400 to 485. Our job is to figure out how to get the most amount of money, and then you can decide whether or not you want to accept the money. The real question here is we got 3 offers, Mr. Seller, and one was 480, one was 485, one was 495, and we worked those against each other, and the most amount of money we could get for your house was $495,000. The question is whether or not you would take it or not. Well, yeah, in that scenario, I would take it. So do we agree that we want to use a strategy that's going to get you the most amount of money that the market is going to bear? Yes. Even if it's not 500,000? Yes. Now, I want to say, Mr. Seller, that I'm not trying to get you to agree to sell for under 500. The truth is, I'm going to try to get you more than 500. If we use the strategy, you ended up getting more than 500, would that be okay? Yes. So I'm not taking 500 off the table. I'm not lowering the expectation. What I'm trying to do is get them to agree that the market is going to give you what the market is going to give you. It might be here. It might be here. Are you going to be okay with that outcome? Are you still going to sell even if you don't hit this magic number that you've laid on the table for me? So here's what we do. This is where most agents fail. You want to have the conversations about pricing strategy and price adjustments after you go live, before you go live. And so you can explain to seller, especially if you're taking a listing live at a price that's higher than your recommendation. Now, listen, if they take your recommendation, it's on you. But if you take their recommendation, it's on them. I'm not saying that you should never take a listing unless you're able to offer it for a lot less than what they want. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that we have an objective. Now, if I have a $500,000 house, we could price it at 525 and sell it in a days on market that will be longer than average. We can sell it right where the comps are, assuming comps are at 500. We can list it right at 500 and expect to sell it in that range for an average number of days. Or we can price it about 5% lower, say 475, and expect lots of traffic, lots of offers, and multiple buyers competing to pay you the highest price. Maybe that's 480, maybe it's 500, maybe it's 525. We won't know. We're only having a conversation about pricing strategy. How do we give you the best opportunity to get 500,000, which is your price, or even more? So if you have that conversation with them and say, I'm just not comfortable with 475, even after you've explained to them that if we list it at 475, the worst thing that'll happen is that we won't get a $500,000 offer. Let's say, for instance, that we only got a $475,000 offer, Mr. Seller. The question you should be asking me that you're not is, do you have to accept it? Now, I'm crystal clear that you're not willing to take $475,000 for your house. And I'm not trying to get you to do that. What I'm trying to do is figure out what's the best way to get 500,000 or more. If we listed it for 475,000, you got one offer for 475, no more. The question you should be asking is, do I have to accept it? And the answer to that question is no. As the owner, you can put it on the market, you can take it off the market. You could raise the price, you could lower the price. If you get a $475,000 offer and you decide, and that's it, well, we simply adjust the strategy and we settle in and hope the market comes to us. but it will be your option. So if you accept my recommended price of 475,000, you will control whether or not you accept an offer or not. So we're clear on our understanding. If we list it at 475 and you can't get your minimum offer of 500,000 if they're stuck there, then you don't accept it. You owe me nothing. And I know that sounds risky to you guys, but I can tell you out of the 1,000 plus houses that I've sold, less than five didn't take the money. They always take the money. Okay. So the way that I set this up in the beginning, so I'm off track a little bit here, but I want to kind of frame this right. So when I'm having this conversation with this, I'm having this back and forth, this dialogue with them, and really trying to help them understand what their options are and the level of control that they have. Okay. This is part of giving them all the information they need to make the best decision for them and their family. And now I say, listen, so let's try your price. So in this case, we present 475, they stick at 500, even 525. You can agree to accept it at that price. Okay. But here's what you also have to say. Listen, if we get to the end of the 10 days and we're not seeing traffic, we're going to need to adjust. If we're getting traffic, but we're not getting offers, we're going to need to adjust our strategy. We're not guessing, we're measuring. So we'll list it at 500,000. We'll watch it for 10 days and then we'll watch the metric. If we're not getting traffic, we know our price strategy is off. If we're getting traffic, we're not getting offers, we know our price strategy is off. And we're going to need to have a conversation about adjusting our pricing strategy. Are you going to be open to do that? And here, listen to me. Sometimes they'll say, no, I'm not going to be willing to do that. Then you've got to decide what the likelihood is that you're going to be able to get them the number they want. And there are some listings that you should not take. But if they're really positioning that because they're saying 500,000, understanding that a lot of people will tell you 500 when they mean 480, but they don't want to tell you 480 because they're afraid that you're going to give their $20,000 away and they want you hustling to get them to 500. And only after they feel like you've turned over every rock and that you war for them to try to get them the money, will they agree to a price less than 500,000. Sometimes they do that. Sometimes they tell you one thing and mean another because they don't know if they can trust you with the number. Does that make sense? So this conversation oftentimes results in a negotiation. So we will oftentimes agree and we'll say, listen, I'm willing to do this, but there's a reasonably good chance that we're not going to get the results that we're looking for within the 10 days. So if we get to the end of 10 days and we're not seeing showings, and we'll know much sooner than 10 days, we know that we missed on price. If we're getting showings but we're not getting offers, we know we missed on price. And when we pre-frame this and we handle this and we pre-agree that we're going to at least have a conversation, now at the end of the 10 days, at the end of the 2 weeks, whatever time frame you specified, now the price strategy conversation, the conversation needed to adjust the price, to adjust the price strategy is not an emotional one, okay? It's a planned step. That's leadership. That's demonstrating your expertise. All right, so let's be honest, okay? Most agents overprice listings because they're afraid to lose the listing, all right? But here's the irony. The fastest way to lose credibility is to take a listing that won't sell. Expired listings, they don't build your brand, they destroy your brand. You don't want to be able to look at your own individual statistics and see that your days on market are longer than average. The best data that I use, I would show with my own comps, a list of all the houses I sold, and I would show them that my average days on market were a lot lower than the markets. That my average days on market were 12, 13, 14 at any one time, while the rest of the market was 30. And that was one of the ways that I demonstrated my success. People have access to that. You know, when I knew that I was competing with another agent, one of the things I would go back to the office and do is I would print out their sales history, I would print out my sales history, and I would circle days on market. And I would send it to them. I said, this is the difference between a 10-day strategy and putting it on the MLS and hoping for a buyer. So Expired listings aren't going to build your brand. They're going to destroy your brand. So, and think about it. When you take a listing that doesn't sell, it costs you money. It does not make you money. All right. The most expensive thing that you can do in this business is invest in a listing that doesn't sell, not just for the money, not just for the time, but for your brand. All right. So committed sellers, okay, they respond to the market. They adjust quickly and they close. Hopeful sellers, these ones that have aspirational, idea, they chase imaginary numbers. They resist adjustments and then they end up expiring. So you've got to decide what kind of seller are you willing to work with. Do you want to work with committed sellers who are just trying to figure out how to sell the house for the most amount of money so they don't leave any money on the table? Or are you willing to work with any kind of seller, even the ones that have an unrealistic expectation of the market that aren't going to be bending? And now listen, I'm not talking about the sellers who feel very strongly about listing at 500 and you feel strongly about listing at 475 and they're not going to budge. This is why I ask them, are you only selling unless you get 500? Or do you think 500 pricing strategy is the best way to get the most amount of money for your house? They say, well, I just want to get the most amount of money. And I think that's really where my house should be listed. Okay. So you're saying if you listed it for 500,000 and you got an offer for 475, do you accept it, reject it, or counter? And I have a hypothetical negotiation. So I get them to commit through a hypothetical negotiation that they would be willing to adjust their price. Now, if I give them a hypothetical negotiation, I said somebody offers them 475, what do you counter? Would they say 5? And I said, okay, and they offer 480, what do you counter? Would they say 5? And I said, they counter at 490. What do you counter? Would they say 5? I know I got an inflexible seller, and now I got to weigh the math. I got to do the math and figure out what are my odds. If I invest $500, $1,000 into this listing, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get a return on that investment? And if the answer is well under 50%, it's not your listing. It's not a listing you want to take. Get your ego out of the way and let it go. Okay? So here's what I want to do. For the next 30 days, I don't want you to argue. I don't want you to cave. Okay? I want you to educate. Remember, you cannot control pricing. Okay? If you can't control the price, okay, and in fact, if you can't get the seller to agree to your recommended price range, okay, don't take the listing. Scarcity creates authority. When you're willing to walk away, you will stop operating from fear. But here's the thing. When you demonstrate a willingness to walk away, they will respect you more if you present it properly. So before your next listing appointment, you've got to be able to fight for your price. You've got to be able to justify your price. You've got to be able to explain your position. But you're not arguing. You're not debating. You're simply giving them the information they need to make a well-informed decision. A seller's perception of price is driven based on emotion. They try to justify it with logic, but the logic that they're using, the data that they're using is bad. What they consider data is what their neighbor said. What they consider data is what Zillow said. That's not data. That's bad information. Your job is to show up prepared to have the conversation using real data. And how does data drive the market? And how do you interpret that data so that they can make a good decision? So before your next listing, build your own pricing framework. So write out your explanation. You should be prepared to do this. Write your explanation out, which is just a clear, concise script that explains how you price. Be able to explain how you explain it. Now, there are tons of videos in our library about how I explain it that you can go in there and model your conversations around. But you'll notice that it's backed by data. It's not backed by opinion. And practice it until you've got it dialed. I didn't get smooth. I'm not naturally smooth around this conversation. I've just been having this pricing conversation for years with hundreds of sellers. That's why I'm smooth. Repetition. Write out your 10 to 14 day agreement, okay? Explain to them what happens. Explain what the steps are going to be. At the end of the day, be able to measure it. Now, I use a couple of different rules of thumb. If we go 15 days without offers, or we go 15 showings without offers, we need to adjust our price strategy. That's the rule of thumb that I've always used. If at the end of 15 days, we don't have offers or 15 showings, whichever comes first without offers, our pricing strategy is off. So it's what I call the 15-day rule, or the rule of 15s, I should say. If we get to the end of 15 days or 15 showings, whichever comes first, and we don't have offers, our strategy's off. And be able to explain what that means. So if we get to the end of it, then we need to have a conversation about pricing strategy. All right. And agree to a framework that allows us to at least have the conversation about adjusting the strategy, not lowering the price. Don't say if we get to the end of 15 days or 15 showings without offers, we need to lower the price. Don't say that. Say if we get to the end of 15 days or 15 showings without an offer, we need to adjust our price strategy. Price strategy is logical. Price reductions are emotional. They will have a tactical, strategic conversation with you, okay? And as long as you keep it positioned, and you also remind them that the objective is still 500,000. When we move the price from 500 to 475 as part of an adjusted strategy, our objective is still $500,000. And also be prepared to say that if we can't get 500,000, I'm not selling, or I'm only selling if I get 500,000. Be prepared to defend that. And the way I defend it is just ask them a question. So what you're saying, if somebody offered you 475, you wouldn't even consider it? Well, I would consider it. Well, what would you counter with? And if they say anything under 500, they're flexible. And by knowing who you're dealing with up front, are they flexible or are they not flexible, makes it much easier for you to position your recommended price. So agents who lead with price lead the transaction. Okay? When you can control pricing, you control the transaction. And agents who lead the transaction control their income. And that's really what you're trying to do. All right? So look, if what I said made you a little uncomfortable, good. Okay? You got work to do. All right? If you're comfortable having these conversations and you're only hustling the listing and you don't care what price, this is where overpriced listings are born. And so the idea here was really kind of get you to look at what I said through your lens. And if you've been doing it differently, try to adopt these strategies, but be firm, be able to explain it. Stop telling them, recommending the price based on your feeling. Don't feel your way around in the dark. You've got to be committed. You've got to be able to define the justification for your recommendation, always reminding them that the objective is here or higher. The strategy to get here is here. And when you do that, you're going to not only win more listings, you're going to win properly priced listings, which you're going to sell houses faster. The faster you sell houses, the more money you make per hour. And the faster you sell houses, the more time you have to do more transactions.